International Language Centre, as it was then, in 40 Shaftesbury Avenue on the first floor. And I said to Mr. Haycraft, there's an awful lot of people who need to learn to speak English. So he said, well, that's fine. These are the prices. I said, well, you're very expensive. He didn't like that because he was charging quite a little amount of money in those days. So then he said, well, bring them along. So I sent some of the people here. And then I said, well, I think it'd be rather nice if I need a job. So he said, well, can you speak French? So I said, yes, of course I can speak French. So he asked me a couple of questions. Well, I could speak schoolgirl French, but not very well. So he said, all right. He said, well, I've got 100 Algerians coming in on next week. And it was a Thursday that I had my interview. He said, you start Monday. So I said, well, that's fine. I'll come. What do you want me to do? He said, well, I don't know what I want you to do. But he said, to begin with, he said, you can go and work with our Mills, who's doing the accommodation, because we have only got them coming on the Monday. So hundreds of these Algerians arrived in batches of about 20. And they were coming from a very hot country, and it was, I think, October, and they were all frozen, they had no clothes. So they were all given £100, and we had to take them out to buy all their winter clothes. And they all had very strange sounding names to me, because I'd never heard of any Algerian Arabic names. And they were always being sent for interview to CJB, which was an oil company. And they were laying pipelines across the desert. And all these young men had to be working with Americans and English people. None of them could speak any English at all, so that's why they were being sent. So they all arrived. They were all accommodated, all looking terribly nervous, and we took them out to buy all these clothes, and then we put them into classes, and that's how that little bit started. To begin with, there were 2 or 3 classes in the morning before the Algerians arrived, and with about 2 students in each class. And then in the afternoon as well, they had more students. There were Monday, Wednesdays and Fridays, and Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays. And Mr. Haycraft said, well, what can you do? So I said, well, he said, you better go and work on reception. So I said, fine. So there was a girl called Sonia, she was from Italy, and she was very proud of all her lists of classes and things, all done in beautiful handwriting. And I came along and I said, well, have all these people paid? He said, what do you mean, have they all paid? I said, well, all these classes are beautifully written out. So by the end of the first 2 or 3 months, there were no students at all because none of them had paid. She'd just been writing their names down and not checking to see if everything was all right. So we started again, and Mr. Haycraft said, well, you better employ some people. He said, but you can call me John. I said, no, you're Mr. Haycraft. And that was always a joke all the way through. Called him himself or Mr. Haycraft, but never John. And some of the people, when they first came into the school, didn't know him. They called him John. I thought, well, that's just not right. Maybe a bit old-fashioned, but Mr. Haycraft is what it always was. So that little bit